Welcome back, everybody, into Bill's Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me tonight, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing this week?
I'm a little on the tired side, but not overly tired. But I will say life is fantastic. Everything's good. Was a fun twist of an experience when it comes to football Sunday, one that I have never had previous to today. I'm just glad that the Bills could finish it off in the 4 o'clock slate with a win that we'll talk about. But I'm doing good, Josh. I'm doing very, very good.
Is there anything you'd like to share, or is that about as much as you'd like to share?
No, so what Josh is, prodding at a little bit here, politely, is this past Monday, as we kind of hinted. So we didn't realize it was going to be this quick for what it's worth. But this past Monday, my wife and I welcomed our first child to this wonderful world. Beautiful baby girl. Both my wife and the baby are very healthy, and we came home as quick as you can when it comes to the turnaround of all the fun things that come with labor and whatnot. If anyone out there has had kids like Josh, you understand it is a process. It's a long
Mhm.
process, but yeah, no, it's been a roller coaster of a holiday week. That is for sure. And I would say, appreciate the in-laws. They actually on a dime came all the way up across this entire state to come and kind of help when it comes to onboarding in the house and taking care of things around the house, especially with the holiday, even give us a little bit of a holiday dinner and everything like that while we dealt with life now having a child. And nope, our beautiful baby girl currently right now is in the warm arms of my wife as I sit here and we record this episode. And it's 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 quite an experience, and I am very much looking forward to now officially being a father.
Well, congratulations to you. Congratulations to you and your wife and the whole Luka fam. And we are excited for you. And we're excited that you're here tonight. I wasn't sure if you would be able to make it or not. I almost put out a tweet when Christian Benford is the hero. You know, Luka's going to make it to the show. But Luka, the Bills, as we transition into something less important than that, but the Bills did win this game that I think they had to win. When you look at what the Bengals looked like on Thanksgiving against the Ravens, we know what a heavy lift the Patriots can be this year. The Eagles are not going to be an easy out despite how off they looked on Friday. The Bills have some tough games left. We've projected they have to get to 11 to make the playoffs. This was a big box to check, not only because it's a team that could be competing with them from a wild card spot, but when you start stacking up the games they have left, when the Steelers are missing their left tackle, they have a quarterback that's only playing with one hand. They were a wounded animal, very much like the Bills. So let's go a little old school style with this game here, Luka. When the Bills walk off the field victorious, 26-7, what's going through your mind?
A deep sigh of relief while also holding a child. It was it was a wonderful feeling. It felt like it's been so long since we've had that kind of. I mean, it was. You know what? I was gonna say I don't want to put it this way, but it really was an easy win.
Mhm.
It was just one of those. Never was it in worry, even as frustrating as it was in the first half with the offense, and how I mean, at one point I was even saying some things aloud, that luckily my child cannot understand what I am saying at that moment about the offense in particular. That it's I never felt worried about the game. So then, of course, as that second half started, and then, of course, all the things that happened early on that kind of created the separation real quick, and the game progressed the way that it did. As they walked off the field, it was just that beautiful sigh of relief, but almost like just sigh of okay, well, and it as the great Bill Belichick said, Josh, we're on to Cincinnati. It was just that mentality of, hey, we're moving on. We have Cincinnati now coming up. And it's like, it was great to have a comfortable, easy win to enjoy as Bills fans and to have this team enjoy, even with all the clunkiness that came along with it. It was a nice, simple relief feeling.
I think this is going to be a weird game to digest because aesthetically, it lacked a lot. This was definitely, I think you can do with this game whatever you want to do tomorrow at the water cooler. If you're the guy in the office, guy or gal, that's been saying this team can't throw the ball, you certainly can go in tomorrow and say, hey, they can't throw the ball. Joe Brady's an idiot. You can go in tomorrow and say that if you want to. This defense can't stop good teams. Well, they stopped the Steelers, but I don't think that hurts your argument because I don't think they're a good team. Here's what I will say. I am well aware of these teams' flaws, and I agree with a lot of the concerns about this team. I've seen the Atlanta game. I've seen the Miami game. Like all of you listening, diehard Bills fans, I'm aware of the fact that this defense at times looks like it has no idea how to stop the run. I'm aware of the deficiencies with the wide receivers on this team. With that being said, today, when you go into a game on the road without your two starting tackles, who are unquestionably two of your top four players on offense, and you go into a game already without Ed Oliver, without Terrell Bernard for whatever that's worth, and you go into a game without Dalton Kincaid, you go into a game without Joshua Palmer, and you put Curtis Samuel on IR, you released Elijah Moore. This was not about style points. This was about getting this game to the win column. I don't know that we can look at this game and say, hey, the Bills fixed this, the Bills fixed that, but I was impressed with the Bills today because they outmuscled the Steelers in Pittsburgh. And my favorite thing about this game, Luka, the Bills were so undermanned on both sides of the ball, missing inarguably some of their best players on both sides of the ball, and I just named the names. The reason the Bills won this game today is because the studs they have played like studs. Josh Allen started playing like a stud. James Cook played like a stud. Joey Bosa, game-changing sack. The guy that picked up the fumble and ran it into the end zone and then intercepted the ball on the next drive, Christian Benford, played like a stud. The guys that you needed to carry this team to victory played like studs, and that's the difference in the game for me.
It's something that hasn't really happened this year for the most part. That's the almost crazy part about that, where you have this MVP quarterback, you have studs, whether they're B level studs or whatever, they're studs to this team and impact players for this team. And they just haven't been showing up for you time in, time out when you need them to. And in a game where, as you pointed out perfectly, health was at its worst, where it's not even just the defensive side of the ball. Now it's infecting both sides of the ball. And you need those guys to truly elevate themselves. And on top of all of that, Josh Allen, for instance, and other James Cook, of course, it wasn't going well early. Josh Allen was pulling the trigger well before he wanted to on any pass because he just clearly did not trust anything going on in front of him on the offensive line early on. I would beg to fight anyone that tells me otherwise. The interception he threw, I made a comment somewhere else where I was like, he threw that ball so quick. I mean, that was like uncomfortable level. Didn't even get to the third step of the drop back. Like, holy shit, I just need to make sure I get this ball out quick because he knows he won't have a lot of time. And he's just hoping Gabe Davis gets there. Like, I think it was targeted to Gabe Davis regardless. It was, you had to battle a little adversity early on in this game, and they were able to. Again, something we haven't seen this team do a lot, if at all, this season. It felt like, as I've commented previously, they're a little bit more of a mentally weak team than we've come to expect from a Bills team led by Josh Allen, coached by Sean McDermott. And to that point, Josh, this is almost one where it felt like McDermott had the team in the right mindset, had Josh Allen and the entire roster top to bottom in the appropriate mindset. And in going into Pittsburgh with the veteran coach in this league across the field, McDermott was not outcoached and the staff was ready to go for the most part. There's plenty of gripes I have and a plenty would have with Joe Brady and the game plan and play calling and just the lack of creativity when it comes to all of that. But I will even say there was a moment in this game, Josh, where I go, we were ready for all things and the coaching was ready to be not out coached. And that was a thing that I didn't even realize existed, just because, of course, kickoff rules have changed, or the style of kickoff has changed. And the fact to have the presence of mind to understand that in that time where you can accept a penalty either on the ensuing kickoff or for the extra point, they took it on the kickoff and then told the kickoff specialist to kick it out of bounds, because by rule it has to then go 25 yards from the point of where the ball was kicked. And because the ball was kicked from the 50, technically, if you kick it out of bounds, the ball's being placed at the 25, not at the 35 if you were to do a touchback. And then by pooching it, you would actually give them the ability to return it, just like it's any other conventional kickoff. You actually broke the rules of the sport in a positive manner, in a legal way, in doing that. That's called being locked in on all facets of the game. That's being what you need to be as a coach. And this is something that I believe has not been there enough from McDermott, from the staff, from everyone, to be locked in and understanding of what they need to do, understand what the game is calling for, whatever it is, and sometimes letting the emotional roller coaster get to them. This was, hey, we got it all under control. We understand what's going on. And even when you have something thrown your way, a bone thrown your way, you immediately recognize the opportunity it presents for you to still control this game in the best manner you possibly can. That is an incredible thing to have late November when you need to start honing that stuff in. And it's not something that I think anyone felt was comfortable to believe that that was possible for this team and for the coaching staff and for the players. So love everything about this point, and kind of everyone stepped up when they needed to, the big boys especially, and then even the coaching staff. Like, credit, I will give credit right here and there. Like, McDermott had this team mentally ready for things, and he even had himself mentally ready to go. And again, in a year that it feels like that hasn't been there as nearly as much as it should be, I'm glad that that even came through in a game that was the most easy game probably of the season so far, but still had its own flaws in its own right when you can break it down a little bit more.
You talk about giving assistant coaches credit. The Bills went into Pittsburgh without Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown playing against a TJ Watt defense, by the way, and gave up 0 sacks while setting a all-time rushing record against the Steelers in that stadium. Aaron bleeping Cromer is an absolute godsend. I know Alec Anderson struggled with snap counts today. I know he had a couple false starts, but Vandemark and Anderson deserve all the praise in the world. And what an awesome story that came out after the game from, I forget which beat writer post, it might have been Sal Capaccio. James Cook said that he texted those guys this morning, told them that he believes in both of them. We're going to go out there and play Buffalo Bills football, and we're going to get this done. And they both texted back, "Love you, buddy." And they got it done. And, you know, you could tell at times they missed Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. You don't just take those guys out of a lineup. Luka, I don't know how many teams in the NFL against any defense, ask the Chargers, you can just remove both tackles who play at a Pro Bowl level, both of them, not all pro, but Pro Bowl level, and just go into a team and set a rushing record. Aaron Cromer, I mean, spoiler alert, is going to get some recognition later on this episode from me. We don't talk about him a lot on this show, but this feels like if we're not going to talk about him now, win.
I'm with you. I love that we're not even 15 minutes into this recording, and it's absolutely deserving. I had that thought cross my brain probably halfway through the third quarter, right before you started hearing the broadcast talk about the Bills being, just a few yards away of breaking this all-time away opposition rushing record against the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Like that, for context, if anyone, because the Steelers aren't great this year, and it feels like they haven't been the Steelers for a little bit time now. To understand that, I mean, that record goes back to the 70s. The Steelers were the team of the 70s for all sports, for that matter. I'd probably put it. And the Steelers were always just known for, you're not going to be able to control against them. You're not going to be able to move the ball against them. So you need to win those, ugly slugfest defensive grinds. And for, individuals old enough, they understand that it's to break that record when there was still, I think the moment the Bills got it, there was still 8 minutes left on the game clock, something to that variety. It
Mhm.
just mind blowing to see how far the Steelers organization has fallen, especially on the defensive side, still with studs over there, mind you, to let something like that happen. To do that, though, with both backup tackles, and for what it's worth, Alec Anderson, when I fully recognized that Alec Anderson was starting at right tackle, the concern I had mentally was as extreme as you possibly can. Alec Anderson to me, Josh, is kind of like he fits as a tackle because he really can't do anything else, anyways. Like that big tight end role he had last season made way more sense for his body type and everything else going on with him than anything when it comes to being a tackle within that, the five heads required of an offensive line. Like, I don't look at Alec Anderson and go, as a sixth or seventh offensive lineman, he's fine. It's like, no, he's kind of like that. Gets you out of a jam quick, or big tight end, extra blocker. Like, that's all Alec Anderson is. To be asked to be the starting right tackle for this team, and Vandemark then having to be on the island on the left side. What a task. And props to Cromer, props to Cook. It felt during the podcast, they kept talking about how Cook was seeing that lane and getting out to the edge and stuff like that. That almost felt like a design understanding that they weren't going to be able to keep things inside the tackles due to these issues. And almost because early on, it didn't feel like it was going too well. So maybe it was a conversation between Brady, Cromer, the tackles, and James Cook. It's like, hey, we're going to start just cracking it hard one way, and just you'll see the spaces out there if the corner isn't collapsing. And it was just there time and time and time again. That is one thing I will say. It's like, that deserves props. If all of a sudden you're doing things like that on a regular basis because you're almost disguising the tackle issue, that's layers to it, incredible props. So I would imagine the offensive line coach has a say in that kind of, scheme design and everything like that. Cromer, well done. I mean, across the board, just what Cromer does regularly for this team, and then on top of it, have Vandemark and Alec Anderson ready for full reps on that line against the Steelers. Alec Anderson having to be lined up against TJ Watt. I fully excuse any false
Oh, yeah.
starts that happened. Like, and when it was happening early, is it frustrating? Yes. Is it understandable?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, those are some serious edges you're going against, and you are not expecting to be playing regularly at all at any point in the season. And here you are having to do it in a must-win type of game. Whew. those those things had to be pretty tight early on there. So when I think those might have been two of the happiest players on this roster, Josh, when that second half started the way it did, and they're like, they could finally have that, breathing room of, okay, now we can settle in a little bit and just run the ball a little bit more. So props to Cromer, props to the tackles. Just, I couldn't even imagine this kind of result, understanding those two in a tackle. I didn't even think it was possible. So I am so over the moon with what we saw in all of those regards.
I think Ryan Vandemark is a guy that Bills fans are finally starting to catch on to, and I'm not saying that in a condescending way. I don't expect people to really be clued in to backup offensive lineman. What an asset he is, and he's a guy that Aaron Cromer has essentially built from the ground up. They traded for an swapped basically with the Colts in his rookie year, and he's been built up to be a very high end third tackle. He started very important games for the Bills and always plays well, in my opinion. If you don't expect backups to play like starters, you usually can view them through a good lens. If you expect them to come in and be Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, you're going to be disappointed. But I think he always holds up well. And, to your point, Alec Anderson would not be my top choice. I would imagine if Grable had more than 4 days to ramp
Yeah.
up, he would have been their top choice. But given the fact that he's a veteran, given that it was a road game, given that communication was key, I get why they went with Anderson over Lunt or Grable. And, to me, he is Ryan Bates 2.0. I think he's better on the interior. He can get you out of the game at tackle. Today, he got him through a game at tackle. I don't know that you ever want to be an every down player, but it's a personality, it's a culture fit. He's a Buffalo Bill through and through. And today he came through when the team needed him, and that was good to see. Luka at halftime, this game was 7-3 Steelers. The sequence at the end of the half was the Bills looked like they were going to go for a touchdown on 4th and 3. I tweeted out from our account, take the points, because this just felt like a game where the Bills and the Steelers, points were going to be a premium. Neither team could really get anything going. I was just in favor of getting points anywhere you could. The Steelers did have 7 on the board, but that was greatly aided by the Bills' second turnover of the game, James Cook essentially bouncing the ball off of his own knee. So the Bills go into halftime down 7-3, and the halftime crowd was upset. And I remember just being calm. And I said, I feel great about where the Bills are at. I think they're pretty clearly the better team. Josh Allen had a bad interception. I would like to have seen Gabe Davis use his body better on that interception, but it is what it is. Credit the Steelers. They made the play. And the fumble is just one of those, like, is this just not going to be our year? Because how does that happen? But beyond that, I thought they were more physical on defense. This is halftime, not the end of the game. And I thought they were clearly more physical on offense. And that was before they did that. And we actually had a commenter in halftime that said, well, what do the Bills need to do to get a spark? And my answer was, well, you can break off a long James Cook run, or, I don't know that there's going to be much verticality of the passing game. They don't have the horses to go deep. They don't have the pass protection, in my opinion, to like drop back far enough to go deep today. But I think it's really going to come down to, can the Bills get a turnover? And I think if they get one, they could just come in bunches against this team. And it's one of those, like, I wasn't necessarily saying it was going to happen, but Luka, what a beautiful start to the second half. And this is where I will kick it back to you, because this is a guy you've been on since his very first training camp. Your very first preseason game, you saw him when he was a 6th-round pick out of Villanova. The play did start with Joey Bosa reminding us who he is when he's playing with 2 good hands. He might be gone for a little bit now, by the way. But the guy that scooped and scored on that one was Christian Benford. The very next drive, Mason Rudolph comes in for 3 passes. One of them is intercepted by Christian Benford, who makes the best sideline catch we've seen from a Bills player. I guess Curtis Samuel had a nice one, but back-to-back drives, Christian Benford, Joey Bosa. That to me was the point of, okay, the Bills are the better team and they're about to impose their will.
Yeah, absolutely. The Bosa, like, just, it was the Bosa fumble, scoop and score by Benford. That was a slow motion moment. That was, I can picture it in my head. I remember they come out. Obviously, it's the first play off of the kickoff, and you watch Bosa go upfield, cut it back. Rodgers sat there for a hot second. I don't know if he fully pumped through a read and just didn't like it or what it was, but I remember thinking to myself, he needed to get rid of that ball then and there. And Bosa, I don't know if he left both his feet, but it felt like he absolutely just mauled him through his back. And I mean, Rodgers or anyone for the most part is probably going to let go of that ball just from the sheer force of getting hit completely blind in that manner. What I will say about this is, and this is where Benford deserves a lot of credit. Benford, this entire game, I think, showed his true value beyond just the coverage abilities that he is as a corner. Benford, I think, was fully recognizing how he could play this game against the offense he was, and was very tight to the line of scrimmage, and was kind of making sure he always had an understanding of where the ball was. And for a corner to play that way, you're not always going to be that way, because of course, if you're, say you're, whatever's been called, you're in charge of a deep third, deep half, whatever it is on the boundary, you have to do what you got to do. That's your job. That's your responsibility. You can't just, go AWOL and just say, no, I'm going to squat on the line because I just don't believe that they'll throw it over me. And the next thing you know, pop one over top of you. But what I will say is, whatever was being called, there was a play earlier in the game where Benford had really just come downfield, made a beautiful tackle in the run game, stuffed it behind the line of scrimmage. I want to say, I don't know if officially it was recognized as a tackle for loss, but he had that. And Benford was just very much active and around the ball. So it surprised me very little when immediately after that fumble, you see Benford almost no hesitation, just scoop it up and easily walk into the end zone to start that second half. That is just a full on classic guy, just knows how to be where you need to be and be around the ball. And for him to have followed up with, look, it was a massive overthrow by massive overthrow by Mason Rudolph. But you got to be where you got to be, and you got to make the catch when you got to make the catch. That's how it goes. And as you put it, one of the best sideline catches we've seen out of a Bills player this season. You get forced the turnover, and at that moment in time, you're just like, Bills, score here. I don't believe, I will say that I don't believe the Steelers can score 10 more points to get it to 17, thinking that if you score a touchdown, you're going to get the extra point to make it 17. That's another thing. But luckily, that one missed extra point didn't matter. Benford single-handedly essentially flipped this game on its head. And it's not that he did it all on his own, but single-handedly because he made the plays that needed to be made. Mm-hmm. And that's, you need players that do that. And that's something that the Bills need. I mean, as a team that the defense is not as great as you want it to be, they live and die and survive on turnovers. That's what they were last year even. And you weren't getting those turnovers this year. You need players that are capitalizing on those moments. And that is exactly what 47 did for this team today. So all the props in the world to Christian Benford to making those things. And shout out Joey Bosa as well, of course, for making that absolute crucial play. It did really suck hearing about that hamstring thing after the game, or late in the game, I think it was technically. But just in time for Joe Burrow. It's the beginning of that second half was just so perfect to anyone like yourself. Not quite like me. I was still just so frustrated with what I was seeing offensively. Not that I at all believed that the Steelers would be able to do a drive worth more than 30 yards of field. But at the same time, when you're down and you don't believe your offense can do anything, you need other facets to step up. You need the special teams to step up, and or this case, the defense to make plays happen. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, all of 5 plays run by the Steelers defense, and they turned it over twice, awarded you 7 points, and then gave you the ensuing drive off of the second turnover that you were able to capitalize on finally with a short field. Game's over at that moment in time. It was simple as that. Game was over because you didn't think this Steelers defense was going to be able to stop the run game of the Bills, and that played out perfectly with the other 2 drives following it. Josh, I just love this stat here. A 15-play 83-yard drive and a 14-play 72-yard drive were the other 2 Bills drives after that touchdown following the Benford interception. You get those play counts because you're running the ball really well. That is simple as that. So, Benford, shout out that beautiful start to the second half to put everything at ease after a bumpy scoreline in the first half.
You know, you mentioned he made the play. It was there to be made. There's a skill there. And one of your favorite Bills players of all time, Micah Hyde, is a player that I think of that comes to mind. Like, he didn't have a ton of splash plays. He did have maybe the best playoff interception I've ever seen. But the hallmark of him was, or the trademark of him was, if a play's there to be made, he's making it. You never saw him drop a pick. You always saw him in position. He would carry out his responsibility tenfold. He was never the most athletic, but exactly where he's supposed to be. And Benford making that play is something this team has not done enough of this year. So that is nothing, not nothing to me. To talk a little bit about negative, you did mention the missed extra point. Now, I don't want to say this is becoming a trend with Matt Prater, but it does feel like the misses are starting to pile up a little bit. They have been more so on extra points than field goals, but as we now start creeping toward December and have heard nothing about Tyler Bass, it's like he doesn't even exist anymore. Are you worried enough about Matt Prater where you're starting to wonder, like, is Tyler Bass coming back, or are you just like, nah, we're good at kicker?
I'm kind of in the middle ground. I'm in the middle ground just because of Prater's age, though. I think that's really what it comes down to, where if this was Prater 5-7 years ago, no, I wouldn't be concerned. Now, I don't think Matt Prater would have just been on the street 5-7 years ago, he was a very reliable kicker at the time. But if he were to have been a Bill at this moment at that performance level and at that age, a couple misses here or there. Prater's a much experienced kicker that he can work through these. And for that point there, though, is why I kind of just go, the age is the only concerning thing with him. I think he's been around the block. He's kicked enough in his life. He understands the intricacies of his own kicking motion to the point where I think he's even changed it numerous times through the progress of his career. That I would imagine as a professional that he is, he's going to simply just work through this. I would imagine if for whatever reason he believes that something went wrong with that extra point miss, he's simply just he's gonna work through it during the week, try to figure out what happened there. Because I will say this, I don't know if he was just misreading the wind, we'll call it, or whatever. A lot of the kicks were pretty tight to one of the posts, and that to me felt like there was intention there why he was kicking it in the manner that he was. And for that sole sentence I just made, I would say I'm not concerned, because that tells me he's doing something at a consistent basis that one just trimmed the post the way that it did, because it just didn't work out the way that it was. Just misunderstood what was needed from the wind or whatever else was going on, misunderstanding what was required with the environment that he was kicking in, so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'm not overly concerned. I think Matt Prater's still fine. The key with Matt Prater to me is just you can't let those stack up. So we'll have to see what happens with Cincinnati. If all of a sudden you see kind of like what we saw with Bass in the past, all of a sudden one miss turns into two misses, a field goal miss and an extra point next week or whatever. If you can get through that and you have a perfect week next week, it's kind of just water under the bridge, move on with your life. If it stacks up and starts snowballing a little bit, that's where I think red flags start to arise a little bit.
And to add some context here, it's really the 6 games since the bye: Carolina, Kansas City, Miami, Tampa Bay, Houston, and Pittsburgh. In that 6-game stretch, he's had one missed field goal. If you remember it, it was the very long one against Kansas City that would have put the game away. The Bills opted to kick the field goal instead of pooch punting it. The Chiefs had very little time left, but it left them an opportunity to throw a Hail Mary. But he has missed 3 extra points in those 6 games. So it's not like on the year, those are the only 3 extra points he's missed. He's only missed 2 field goals. So on the whole, his numbers are still very strong, 85% kicker. But it does feel like, at least recently, that the misses are starting to show up a little bit more than you would like. Other than that, Luka, is there anything about this game that we haven't touched on? I thought, to me, I mean, for us, we're a Bills chat, so it's going to be Bills chat pod. I think the national story of this game is going to be holy cow Steelers,
Oh, yeah.
because Aaron Rodgers was horrendous. He was playing with one hand. The receivers did not get open. And the running game was, like you already mentioned, what are we trying to accomplish here? The defense was a sieve. Like, it's that security meme where it's just like you are just watching the security let the guys through. There are some holes going out there on Twitter where it's just wide open spaces. And the fire Tomlin chants
Yeah.
were very prominent. And I do think this is a disconnect between the national perspective and the local perspective. I think the national perspective of Tomlin is that he's one of the best coaches in the sport. He always gets his team to winning records with bad quarterbacks. The local perspective is they're tired of him. And they blame him for a lot of the lackluster Steelers teams they've seen recently. I certainly am not educated enough on the Steelers to have a super strong opinion on that, other than that I would say that I don't think he gets enough of the blame for the quarterback choices. I think he's the most powerful voice in that building, and I think if he wanted to take bigger swings at quarterbacks, they would. But maybe just a few minutes here, Luka, on the Steelers before we get to game balls, game checks. What were your thoughts on them as a team? What about their direction? I know Aaron Rodgers has been a player you've been a fan of, at least early in his career. Interesting team. What do you think about what's going on there in Pittsburgh?
I found myself during that game, as it was progressing in the fourth quarter, mainly, that it was one, I could only imagine what Steelers fans were thinking. And my first thought is, can we get Russell Wilson back to what it was last season? And how sad that is. But that's what it felt like. I mean, this team that goes out and trades for DK Metcalf and then pays him, goes and signs and convinces. I mean, I'll say convinces, because the book is out on if Aaron Rodgers was going to retire this offseason, if he wanted to go to Minnesota, which that's a whole nother conversation in its own right, or sign with the Steelers. And he ends up signing with the Steelers, thinks there's something going on with DK Metcalf, seeing things in there that he likes, whatever. They have so much going on that feels dysfunctional and all over the place. You can see it in the man, like play after play on the, we'll highlight the offensive side, because that is just where it feels so odd. They're never on the same page. It doesn't feel like anything's going right. I mean, it's just one of those things where I just don't believe the message in the locker room and in the inside the facility is anything that across the board everyone is with. And if that is kind of a problem, a systemic issue of that nature, where not everyone's on the same page, not everyone's on board with whatever's trying to be delivered as a message, as a philosophy, as whatever you want to call it, that's a head coaching problem. That is a problem of the leader that should be there to get everyone on board. And that's, I mean, that's something that I flirted with, the idea of possibly leaking its way into the Bills locker room with McDermott of recent. I think today showed me that maybe that's not the case. And it's just, there's a lot more of tactical issues going on, and or coaches that shouldn't be in the positions that they are issue, and or GM is way over his depth and thinking everything's okay issue personnel wise. That's Bills. With the Steelers, yeah, I think Tomlin has gone stale. I think as you said, I think the quarterback point is one that doesn't get discussed enough. When you look at the track record with the Steelers, Tomlin inherited Big Ben. It just continued the success through Big Ben. Wins one Super Bowl on the back of Big Ben that we don't have to go into specific details of, and then continues success through that to the end of Big Ben's career. And then all of a sudden it's Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. I don't know if he was the one that was the driving force on drafting Kenny Pickett. If he was, that should have been a fireable offense in its own right. Then you bring in Russell Wilson, I believe, partially because you got him on the cheap, but also because, you know, something Tomlin probably liked about him, that he could manage a game in a certain manner, we'll call it, that he saw in Denver. And now you have Aaron Rodgers. And I will just say that I don't believe Mike Tomlin was fully on board. Rodgers doesn't feel like the type of guy that Tomlin was bringing in there. If you just, I listed out the quarterbacks, and then it's like Aaron Rodgers doesn't fit that. And that felt like a move of Rodgers wanted to come, so we're just going to make it happen. And now it's created even more division across the board and more issues. And I think Rodgers is probably, God bless you, Rodgers. You have 4 MVPs, I believe, in your career. You have a Super Bowl ring. I think it's time to start that 5-year clock for your Hall of Fame. I think that is just the reality of it. And I think the Steelers and the Rooney family really need to consider the fact that this train, like, they don't change coaches often. They really just don't change them at all. I believe they've had 3 in basically their entire history, but they need to look for number 4. They need to overhaul this entire thing. And the money as well. It's such a shit show that I don't know how you do it from a roster perspective. You have a lot of people locked up in certain manner, but at the same time, it's like you're not locking up bums either. Like TJ Watt, you have locked up now. Like, how in the world is TJ Watt not a perennial defensive player of the year candidate? He was up until this year, and now all of a sudden he's just 0 sacks for the Steelers today. Something you highlighted right before we went live. You thought that box score had to be wrong. Nope, it's correct. Now, does help that the Bills ran the ball 51 times, but that's also part of the issue. They successfully ran the ball 51 times. You're not able to let your pass rusher pin their ears back and get to the passer if they don't need to pass. So it just so many things going wrong with the Steelers right now that as a football fan, it's sad because the Steelers are just one of those absolute pillars of the NFL and of football that it just having them be a vanilla ice cream cone in a dish with no sprinkles right now and just an absolute just sitting out in the sun melting away. Like it is just like do something else. This is gone on long enough. Tomlin, you are potentially a great, if not above great coach for what you had done, but where it's going is just not good enough anymore. And the Rooney family needs to step in and change the vibes in that entire organization.
I agree. It's been a lot of mistakes. You mentioned the quarterbacks, and Mike Tomlin gets a lot of credit for winning games with Mitch Trubisky, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph. This year, broken down Aaron Rodgers, but it's almost like he wears that as a badge of honor instead of taking ownership of whatever role he has and selecting the quarterback as the most powerful voice in that building. And then you look at even something as simple as giving away George Pickens and then trading more than you got for George Pickens for DK Metcalf and paying him
Yeah.
$27 million a year. It just doesn't add up, especially the way Pickens is playing in Dallas. All right, Luka, it is time for us to do game balls and game checks. Game balls, very simple. Who's your MVP from the game? Game checks. Who didn't even need to show up today? We would like to revoke their game check. Luka, who gets your game ball award for the Bills? I should probably mention the final score at some point on this show, shouldn't
26-7
I?
win.
26-7 victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I think this might be the most transparent game balls segment we've ever had for an episode.
Already given them.
I think we already gave them through this because, yeah, mine's simple. He wears a 4 and a 7 on his jersey. And I think he was just the man who turned this game around and made sure his impact was felt, even in a game where the opposition couldn't throw the ball forward. And his position generally depends on that being a thing in order to make any sort of impact. But he made sure that he could make the plays when they were there to be made, as you highlighted so perfectly with that statement. And I did double check. He did, even on top of it all, have that tackle for loss that I mentioned that made his impact there in the first half. Christian Benford gets my game ball. He was an absolute perfect player out there for this defense. He made the plays that were needed. He flipped this game on its head on the score sheet. And I just, this is the kind of game for a player like him, finally with the contract under his belt and all of those things, and kind of having a little bit down year for where his expectations are. This could be that kind of game that could turn his swagger back, turn his vibes back, and get him going back in those positive directions to be the number one corner we truly need him to be, down the stretch and in the games that matter. So Christian Benford, game ball, absolutely deserved.
Absolutely agree with that choice. Some other guys that could have been mentioned. Joey Bosa had the massive sack and forced fumble. By the way, Thigh Doctor on Twitter speculates that, looking at it back on the TV copy, it's not going to be a severe hamstring injury. He said it's even possible that he'd get him back for next week, although he speculates that given the fact that they play the Bengals or the Patriots in 2 weeks, he would think that that they'd give him the full 2 weeks off, but he wouldn't expect him to be like out for a month like we've seen with Kincaid. So that's encouraging. James Cook obviously just continues his ascension into the upper echelon of elite running backs, and he is now only 60 yards off of Jonathan Taylor as the NFL leading rusher. 32 carries, 144 yards for Cook, and also led the way with receiving. Not a big number, but 33 yards on 3 catches. James Cook was massive today. Shaq Thompson was a guy that stood out not only for the personality, the leadership, the comments he made early in the week. McDermott called him out about giving a speech to the team early in the week. He said that's something about leadership. Luka and I talked off the air. Shaq Thompson's the best linebacker on this team. You can look at their paychecks. You can look at when they were drafted. Doesn't matter right now. Football games need to be won. He's the best linebacker on this team. Figure everything else out after that point is accepted by everybody involved. Beyond that, nobody else really stands out to me except for the guy that I'm going to choose. On a day when you're down your 2 offensive tackles and you go into Pittsburgh and give up 0 sacks, and you set a rushing record for that stadium. I'd love to mention Alec Anderson. I'd love to mention Ryan Vandemark. Hell, I'd love to mention the interior guys because they're playing next to inexperienced players. But the best way to recognize all of those guys is to recognize their coach, Aaron Kromer. I think we've known for a while he's a great coach. He certainly has that track record. But one thing is, if you want to make points against him, is for all that poor injury luck the Bills have had, it really has never impacted the offensive line like it did today. Continuity for that group for the last 2 years has been outstanding. The 5 starters almost always play outside of a game or two from like Spencer Brown or Deion Dawkins here and there. Aaron Kromer brought his A game today, and the offensive line and that rushing attack absolutely won the day. So love giving it to Aaron Kromer. All right, Luka, with the good, there's got to be some bad. Who gets your game check award today?
Ooh, man. It feels tough-ish. I will say this. In this spot, Josh, shout out Ray Davis, because he's not even remotely close to contention
Good
for
call.
this one. He popped when needed. I mean, there was even a moment where Cook had to sub himself off. I think something was going on with his helmet. It wasn't anything health related per se. And the next 2 runs or next 2 carries for Ray Davis, who came out there, I think both went for first downs immediately. It was 1st and 10 run for, I want to say it was 12 yards. And then the next one was for 11 yards, whatever it might have been. It was like, oh, Ray Davis wanted to show up and play. 9 carries, 62 yards. That, beautiful thing. 6.9 average. Nice. That's great. In this segment, it feels appropriate to shout out Ray Davis. You are not a game check candidate. What I will do, though, is I will honestly, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. And I'm going to just go ahead and say I give it to the entire receiver core.
There you
Just
go.
as a unit. And the reason I do, and the craziest part about it is one of receivers caught a touchdown on a 4th and goal for this team. And
If you and I drop that pass in the backyard, we get made fun of by our kids.
Correct.
And your kid's a week old and she's still laughing at you.
Week old in 24 hours. We still got time. So when I look at a box score and I see James Cook, who had 32 carries, and all the yards that he had, he also was your leading receiver, both in receptions with 3 and yards, 33. And then next up is Dawson Knox, tied with 3 receptions for 28 yards. And then next after that is Ty Johnson, tied with 3 catches for 20 yards. Where does that lead me? It leads me to the leading receiver being Brandon Cooks. 1 catch, 13 yards. And if you don't remember when that happened, it was on the opening drive for the Bills. When that is your leading wide receiver target line and receiving line, that is a massive problem. Keon Coleman was the only wide receiver to have more than 1 catch. It was 2 for 9 yards and a score. And once again, as Josh highlighted, if any of us dropped that ball, we would be embarrassed. Great catch. You got to make it when it is. Cool. The receivers, once again, was passing needed in this game? Absolutely not. Get it. But I don't come out of this game feeling any better about anything in the passing game as a whole. And primarily the issue does once again feel like that boundary situation. And even for that matter, the slot situation is not great on this roster. Like Khalil Shakir is also starting to highlight himself as maybe you're not actually that. I think Khalil Shakir can be a good, great player. Right now, it's bad. It is just bad. The only slot weapon that exists on this roster was inactive today, and that is Dalton Kincaid. Mind you, Dalton Kincaid is a tight end. Wide receiver is bing, 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 massive problem. Hey, Brandon, call into WGR and tell me once again how this is not a problem. I would love to hear your thoughts. You just signed a guy off the street on Wednesday. He now just led in yards of that entire core. Wide receiver core, to wrap this up with a bow, because I could go on for hours. You are my game check situation. Figure it the F out.
This wide receiver core looked like a group that was missing 3 or 4 of their top players. Unfortunately, they weren't. They were missing one guy. They were missing Joshua Palmer. Now, I do think if you want to be optimistic, about the Bills passing game, you can get there. You can say Dalton Kincaid's coming back. There's no more important player in the passing game on the receiving end than Dalton Kincaid when he's healthy. That's a big win because the games he's not healthy is starting to add up. Speaking of guys who can't stay healthy, Luka mentioned this a lot in the summer. I think Joshua Palmer's their best wide receiver. I don't know how much that's saying, but I think Luka, the thing you mentioned is watch out for this guy who can't stay healthy. I think he gets open better than any other receiver they have. Maybe I'll set Brandon Cooks aside for that conversation because I really haven't watched him too closely yet. I think he's the most well-rounded receiver. That includes Khalil Shakir. If he and Kincaid are healthy, I think you have one really good weapon in Kincaid and one respectable weapon in Palmer. And from there, you hope for continued improvement with Brandon Cooks as he integrates himself in the system. And then everybody else, I don't know. You're just not getting much from anybody. I guess Shakir is an okay slot at this point in time. I think the Keon Coleman experiment is about deader than dead. He was very behind in the pecking order today. The reason why I had trouble with it, because I was like, what about Gabe Davis as my game check? But on a day they ran so well, I'm sure Gabe Davis and Tyrell Shaver specifically deserve a lot of credit for that. But I'm with you. The receivers are a problem. There's not a lot of answers coming back. Maybe McCole Hardman comes back and factors into that, but boy, oh boy, it's going to be an interesting offseason. Hopefully it's several weeks into January and February away. My game check award is not necessarily going to be about the Pittsburgh game specifically, but more of a larger point that's been bothering me. I'm going to give it to Jordan Phillips. I don't understand why he's on the 53-man roster. I just don't. I loved Jordan Phillips early in his Bills career. 2019, 2020, 2021. He's a juice guy. He's a great personality. People get a kick out of him wearing the big coat on the sideline. The problem is in 2025 he's not a good football player. And it's not like that the Bills have, Pat Williams in his prime as an option there, but we've seen things out of Zion Logue. We know that Morgan Fox is a player that can be helpful. TJ Sanders is playing defensive end, for God's sake. Can we get TJ Sanders playing defensive tackle? Jordan Phillips played 13 snaps today against the Steelers. That's a waste of an activation. I don't understand why he is active on this roster. I don't know what he brings to this roster. Unlike Jordan Phillips of years past, where you'd have splash play games and then games where he disappears, now you're just seeing games where he disappears. So I need Jordan Phillips to go away respectfully, back to the practice squad where he belongs, where he can be that street clothes. You can wear your coat on the sideline, just not under a jersey. I don't need to see Jordan Phillips on the sideline on game day in a uniform anymore. The Bills, even though they're down a bunch at defensive tackle, have better options than him, and it's time they utilize those. All right, Luka. I will be back next week for Bills Bengals, which is now ultimately a very intriguing game. Luka, as we mentioned earlier in this show, his life is a little bit in flux right now. We're all going to respect that, his family at Bills Chat. But our third man, Stokes, has already given me some availability options for the Wednesday live show if Luka can't make it. For next week, Sunday night, potentially, if Luka can't make it. I'll be back for halftime next week for Bills Bengals. So our shows are going to continue. There may be a little less of Luka in the interim as he gets used to this new normal that is dad life. Luka's not going anywhere, folks. Bill's Chat's not going anywhere. It just might look a little bit different while he's adjusting to getting 2 hours of sleep at a time. Yeah. Luka, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I mean, next week against the Bengals, when you watch the Bengals dismantle the Ravens on Thanksgiving, brings a lot more concern than it did a week ago this time. Joe Burrow looks as healthy as, I don't want to say as ever because that's a stretch, but he's moving great. He can still throw the ball better than pretty much anyone else in this league. There was a touchdown he threw in that game, Josh. That was an absolute seed, a one of one. I even question if Josh Allen could throw a ball that well. That is how good it was. And it's like, oh shit, this guy is back. Why couldn't he just be away for a couple more weeks? Blah, blah, blah. But here we are. So if the Bills want to continue these high vibes and not just be that roller coaster, they got to go through it. A quarterback that is clearly still himself. And if T Higgins is back for them and you have to deal with both Chase and T once again, I honestly, as a football fan, cannot wait for that game. But I am very nervous as a Bills fan because that, even though you're playing the worst defense in the league, that is a problem if you're going up against Joe Burrow, and I am concerned.
I'm already excited for it because what I would do sitting here today, there is not a player in a Bills uniform who can cover Jamar Chase. There's just not. I would say, Christian Benford, your job today is to take away T. Higgins as best as you possibly can. That may not go well. You might think you have him covered and he dunks on you, but your job is to try to find a way, somehow, some way, in one-on-one all game to take him away. Everybody else, we're having 2 or 3 guys on the other guy because that guy is about as good as it is in the sports athletically, skill-wise, especially when Burrow's back there. I'm fascinated by this matchup. Can't wait to get into it later in the week. All right, well, for Luka, I am Josh McCarty. The Bills are 8-4, back in the win column, sitting well in the playoff race. Bills Chat will be back next week with a Bills Bengals postgame show, and we will see you next week on Bills Chat.